So it's this weird middle ground that the Bruins kind of find themselves in, where they have assets that would be coveted around a league in a blockbuster deal, but I don't think those blockbuster deals are out there. And then there are some other guys to be had that aren't worth giving up, the Bruins' top prospects. And then the Bruins' second-tier prospects, I don't think move the needle for those moves. Okay, so where does that leave us? Good question, Brian.
You're listening to the PuckUps Podcast. It's time to hit the ice with Brian DeFelice.
Welcome into episode 47 of the PuckUps Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, and thank you all for joining me. On today's show, I'm going to try to mock together a realistic offseason game plan for the Boston Bruins this summer. But first things first, if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and subscribe to the PuckUps on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that you get your podcast. And to get in touch with me or be a part of the show, you can email me, info@thepuckups.com. You can tweet at me on X @BrianDFelice_. You can tweet at the show at the PuckUps, or leave a comment on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, anywhere the show has a social media account and post content. So as I said off the top, the goal of today's show is to try to mock together a reasonable and realistic off-season game plan that the Boston Bruins could try to go out there and execute this summer. Now, obviously, the Boston Bruins are not going to follow this plan move for move. In fact, they're not even going to see this. But it's a ballpark template of how I think they should play things. It's not exactly a dream scenario for me. It's not fantasy booking. It's me looking at where the Bruins currently are as an organization, looking at their roster pieces, their contracts, looking at their assets, what they're worth, what they could get. Should they even be willing to part with some of them? What players around the league could be traded for, could be signed, all of that. And how can the Bruins keep their trajectory going upward? How can they improve their roster from last year while not mortgaging key parts of their future? That is the challenge. And also, I want to get ahead of this now because I've seen the comments, the Bruins should trade this guy for that top center. The Bruins should trade this guy for that top center. The Bruins should trade this guy for that top center or that top defenseman. Or, the key word in this exercise is, in all caps, realistic. Okay, so I wanted to address the elephant in the room before we get going here and talk about some of the top line centers that a lot of Bruins fans have been coveting for one reason or the other over the last few months. Robert Thomas. I don't think he's going anywhere. I don't think St. Louis has any interest in trading him. He's turning 27. He's a true number one center in his prime. And St. Louis has a lot of first-round draft picks. They have 3 this June, where Thomas can be a part of their long-term future, even if St. Louis isn't a bit of a retool. And there are some other assets that St. Louis has that they could trade if they wanted to, but Robert Thomas is not going anywhere, okay? Well, how about Nico Hischier? Nico Hischier, rumor has it, is making positive momentum towards an extension with the New Jersey Devils. Okay. What about Austin Matthews? He wasn't happy with Toronto earlier this offseason. He kind of gave them an ultimatum. Well, then Toronto got the number 1 overall pick, which will probably be Gavin McKenna. And I believe Elliot Friedman said that Austin Matthews and Toronto management had some good talks, good conversations. Either way, Austin Matthews is not going anywhere right now. Well, trade for Leon Draisaitl, trade for Connor McDavid. They must want out of Edmonton, right? That's not how I can conduct this exercise in good faith. I can't try to map out what the Bruins could possibly do this offseason regarding players that there's no reason to think that they're going anywhere right now. Maybe someday, and maybe someday soon, but right now, things are going to happen really fast this offseason. There's a 48-hour roster freeze following the Stanley Cup Finals. So on Wednesday, when that thaws out, between then and the draft and free agency, there's going to be a lot happening. I can't do this exercise with the pipe dream that Leon Draisaitl is going to come to the Boston Bruins, okay? Well, Brian, what about Dylan Larkin? Okay, good point. Dylan Larkin, he has requested a trade. But the Boston Bruins are not on his list, according to any sources that have reported on the story. And even if he added the Bruins as a secondary option or a third tier option, would I want the Bruins giving up, all of their top prospects or a good chunk of them for Dylan Larkin? Personally, no. But if the reports out there was that Larkin wanted to come to Boston, then maybe I would include him in this exercise more seriously. But again, I can't. I can only go based off of what information that we have out there. And I'm not an NHL GM. I'm not a player agent. So I'm sure that there are players around the league that GMs know because they talk to each other because they're all buddies and colleagues and former colleagues. They used to play together or play against each other, whatever. They all know each other, right? So they can probably shoot each other a text about how this guy, probably isn't happy and might be on a trading block. But these things happen behind the scenes, and there are probably players out there that we don't know about that could be more likely to be traded than not, but we're not hearing about it. So I have to go off what we know with this exercise, okay? And I tried to go, I tried to keep it down the middle here. Another couple of players that get brought up. Oh, the Bruins should trade for Leo Carlsson. Leo Carlsson, yeah, he's an RFA. He's priority number one in Anaheim, and they have so much cap space to sign him long term, and the cap is gonna keep going up. It's going to go to 113 million and then 123 million in just a matter of a couple of years. So Leo Carlsson is not going anywhere. Neither is Connor Bedard. The Chicago Blackhawks are not going to lose Connor Bedard to an offer sheet or trade him because he's an RFA. So players like that, they're not available. What 1C options are out there besides Dylan Larkin, really? And Dylan Larkin, I don't think is coming to Boston. And Robert Thomas is not being traded. None of the other guys I said are being traded. So this pipe dream of the Bruins landing a number one center, to my knowledge, is completely unrealistic, at least right now. And God help us if it's Vinny Trocheck. If the Bruins trade for Vinny Trocheck, then, oh boy, they have a lot worse issues on their hands than they currently do. So that better not be an option. Jason Robertson, he's a 96-point left winger in his prime that, hey, if the Stars don't extend him and they don't trade him before July 1, if I'm the Bruins, I would very much consider offer sheeting Jason Robertson, but I think he's going to be extended in Dallas and or traded. I don't think Dallas will let an asset like that go to an offer sheet, regardless of the draft pick compensation he would garner. So I don't think Jason Robertson is really that realistic in terms of the Bruins adding him either. Simone Nemec, right? This is where, and I'm not trying to give away my moves or the ones that I'm making or not making, but this is the problem with the Bruins right now, is that it kind of feels like, because the Bruins have the assets to make some huge trades, or at least a huge trade for sure. If you add between James Higgins, Fraser Minton, Dean Letourneau, Will Zellers, first round picks, like the Bruins could absolutely trade for a blockbuster deal if they were willing to include their highest assets. But there aren't many players out there currently that we know that are available, if any, that in my opinion are worth giving up any of those players or assets right now. And then you have like second tier options on the blue line. That's also a need for the Bruins, like Simone Nemec. And it's like, well, I'm not going to give up Higgins or Letourneau or Zellers or Minton for him. So then it's like, okay, well, how about Mason Lohrei or Matt Poitras? And I don't think those guys move the needle for Simone Nemec. So it's this weird middle ground that the Bruins kind of find themselves in, where they have assets that would be coveted around a league in a blockbuster deal, but I don't think those blockbuster deals are out there. And then there are some other guys to be had that aren't worth giving up the Bruins' top prospects. And then the Bruins' second tier prospects, I don't think move the needle for those moves. Okay, so where does that leave us? Good question, Brian. Okay, so let's get into the offseason mock-up that I have here. There's a combination of trades and signings and all of that. And I didn't pull anything out of my ass in terms of contracts, right? Like I used AFP Analytics, who does a great job projecting RFA and UFA's their term in terms of years and their AAV for their next projected contracts. So I heavily relied on AFP Analytics in that category. And then as far as trades, listen, as I said earlier, I'm not an agent. I'm not an NHL GM. You know, I really have no way of actually knowing if a trade proposal is perfect or not, but I like to think they're in the ballpark, right? And you know, you can take what I get put on the screen and modify it a little bit if you want, but generally speaking, I don't think I have anything that's crazy. I think it's in the ballpark. You know, it's interesting because a lot of times you have fans that will project what a trade package would look like for certain players that are rumored to be traded. And then those players get traded. And a lot of times the reaction by fans is, that's it. That's all they went for. So just keep that in mind when we're doing this exercise, that it might feel like a certain trade proposal is either a lot or a little. And I don't know, like I've been blown away sometimes by certain trade returns, or either a team giving up too much or too little and getting the job done. Like the Mark Stone trade, for example, years back. Vegas got Mark Stone without even having to give up a first round pick, right? It's like, and he went on to be their captain and win a Stanley Cup with them. So there's a lot of examples of that's it. Anyway, so keep that in mind. My goal here with this Bruins mock off season, first and foremost, was to try to get rid of some contracts that I think are on the books that shouldn't be right now. And so we start off this exercise with the Bruins having projected $15 million in cap space this summer. Okay, so let's start off with some trades here and see where we're at for cap space at the end of these trades. Okay, so my first trade of the offseason, as you see here, is the Boston Bruins trading right shot defenseman Henri Jokiharju and the signing rights to prospect Andre Gasso to the Vancouver Canucks for a 2027 third-round draft pick. Now, Henri Jokiharju by himself, I feel like is kind of worth like a fourth rounder, but you throw in Gasso, and I just think you bumped it up to a third rounder in 2027 for Vancouver. And, you know, Vancouver is a team that's rebuilding, but they could use some NHL defensemen, and Henri Jokiharju could fill a need for them on the right side, third pair. Andre Gasso, again, we'll see what happens with his career, but he clearly doesn't feel like Boston is the place for him to start his career. And so I look around the league and say, okay, well, what team could give him a chance? Well, maybe a team that's going to be probably a basement team for a long time, especially, you know, having not won the lottery to draft Gavin McKenna. They'll still get a hell of a player. But yeah, I just feel like Vancouver is a team that would take on Jokiharju as a third pair guy because you have to ice a lineup. And Gasso is a prospect that why not? Why not see what he can do? You know, Vancouver, they've lost JT Miller. They've lost Quinn Hughes. Jake DeBrusk, old pal Jake DeBrusk, is rumored to be wanting out of Vancouver. Brock Besser can't be happy there. We all know Elias Pettersson is an interesting story out there as well, and he probably wants out. Philip Ronek, I think, is a player that he says he's happy in Vancouver, but I don't know why he would be. I don't know why he would be. It's a beautiful city, but the team isn't going to win anytime soon. So anyway, Henri Jokiharju and Andre Gasso to Vancouver for a 2027 third round pick. You shed Jokiharju's salary cap hit and open up some room on the right side of the Boston's defense. Our next trade this offseason, and I hope something like this could happen. I really don't know. But I look at Mikey Eyssimont, who has a cap hit of $1.5 million, and Jonas Korpisalo, who has a cap hit of $3 million. Ottawa is retaining $1 million of that. And the Bruins trade those two players to the Edmonton Oilers for a 2028 seventh round draft pick. Now, listen, the Oilers, they could use goaltending. They could always use goaltending. Right now, I'm pretty sure it's just Tristan Jarry that they have under contract. And then I think they have like a mid-20s AHL guy who also might be up for a deal. So they could use an NHL caliber backup goaltender who could challenge Jarry for a starting role. Obviously, Korpisalo is not, I don't think he's going to be their savior, but the Oilers could use goaltending. Korpisalo, he had a decent year for Boston, and I just feel like he could give them some stability, a little bit of stability at that position, a little bit. And, they also, maybe the Bruins have to eat a little bit of Korpisalo's contract too. I kind of went back and forth about, do the Bruins eat 20% or 15%, but screw it. I just went with this. And the 2028 seventh round pick, that's nothing. It's 2 years from now. It's a seventh round pick. I feel like the Bruins throw in, Eyssimont just as kind of like a, thanks for taking on all of Korpisalo's contracts. And, we're asking for nothing more than a seventh round pick in 2 years from now. So if the Bruins could ever pull off something like this, then I think that would be great. Other options are to find another team that could use Korpisalo services, or buy him out. But again, I don't think it's crazy here. I'm not saying that this would happen, and maybe you guys don't agree with this, but could the Bruins trade Korpisalo and Eyssimont and get a seventh round pick back in 2 years from now? I mean, that's not crazy. Edmonton get a bottom six guy that has some sandpaper, which every team needs. And you get a backup goalie who could potentially challenge for a starting role that, again, they are currently without, it's just Jarry right now for Edmonton. I think they have to either sign a guy or, in this case, trade for Korpisalo. So I don't know. It just kind of seems like a possible fit and something that I would kick the tires on if I were the Bruins. As far as the actual return, is a seventh round pick in 2028 too much? I mean, that's barely anything. Again, maybe the Bruins would have to eat a little bit of Korpisalo's contract here. But again, a ballpark type of trade, something like this is what I would try to do if I were the Bruins. Next up, we have the Boston Bruins trading Casey Mittelstadt to the Seattle Kraken for a 2027 second round pick. I think that's a fair return for Casey Mittelstadt. He's obviously not going to get you a first round pick in the offseason. He had a pretty good year last year for Boston on a pretty solid line league wide with Victor Arvidsson and Pavel Zacha. But I just don't see him as a part of Boston's long-term future. He's got a year left on his contract. The counter argument to trading him this offseason is that maybe you could flip him at the deadline for something more. But honestly, if the Bruins carry him on the roster next year and they're a playoff team or thereabouts at the trade deadline, we all know the Bruins aren't going to trade him. We've seen this song and dance before. They won't trade him. They'll only trade him if the Bruins have a shit year and they can get something for him at the deadline. But obviously, none of us here are hoping that the Bruins have a shit year. We're hoping that they have a good year, or at least a year that's building upon last year. So if the Bruins can move Mittelstadt for a second round pick, and Seattle's the type of team that I think would take him. Mittelstadt has very limited trade protection, so maybe Seattle's on his short list, but I don't know what that list says. So Seattle, they certainly they could use help in their middle six, and Mittelstadt can play center or wing. Obviously, he's played wing mostly in Boston. So Seattle, they seem like just a team that would be, I don't want to say dumb enough because Mittelstadt's certainly worth a second round pick, but it would just be another average player on an average team. But if you look at Seattle's roster and their forward depth chart, their second and third line left wing options they're nothing great, and he would certainly be an upgrade at third line left wing, maybe even right wing. So Seattle gets a middle six guy that can play the power play and be versatile for them. And it's costing them a second round pick next year. So I think this is a fair deal. And again, as far as any salary retention, Seattle has the cap space and there's a year left on Middlestad's deal. Maybe they can renegotiate after that. But I think this is again, is it a perfect trade proposal? I don't know. I'm not an agent or a GM, but something along these lines, I think the Bruins could try to do to shed some salary cap space and, bring back a second round pick. But again, it's not a nothing move for Boston. Like Middlestat was a good player for them last year, and he was a big part of their second line. So this is, I know there's a lot of Bruins fans that look at this and say, good riddance. But he was decent for them, and I'm sure he would be decent for them again next year. So this is another move I would try to do if I were the Bruins. Now, this is the first type of move for the offseason in my realistic offseason game plan. Now, listen, I don't know if this is giving up too much if you're the Bruins or if it's not giving up enough at all. Because to be honest with you guys, I look at the players on this list. Now, let me just read this trade real quick. The Boston Bruins trade Mason Lohrei and Matthew Poitras along with a second-round pick from Seattle acquired in the Casey Middlestad trade to the Columbus Blue Jackets for forward Kent Johnson. Now, there are some reasons as to why I'm doing this. And first and foremost, the Blue Jackets do not have a second-round pick in 27 or 2028. So this move, giving them a 2027 second-round pick, is strategic because it gets them back into the second round next year, which all teams like to try to recuperate draft picks that they've traded away. So Columbus gets a draft pick back that they don't currently have. And they also get a young left shot defenseman with upside. We all know Mason Lohrei defensively is a project, to say the least, and he might be what he is at this point defensively. But offensively, he could go in and play on Columbus's left side in a third pair role to start and play power play. Not top power play, but maybe second power play, because they have somebody called Zach Werenski. Don't know if you've heard of him. Norris Trophy winner. But you get Mason Lohrei and you acquire his potential upside. A year left on his deal at $3.2 million. He has no trade protection, so therefore he can go wherever the Bruins want to send him. I think we all recognize the potential upside that Mason Lohrei has. And also, listen, not for nothing, but he's been an NHL regular for 2.5 seasons now. So say what you want about him, but he's a legit NHL defenseman. He's not an AHL guy. We all know that. And if you're Columbus, you're hoping that you can unlock something with him, even offensively, because I feel like in Boston he didn't really thrive in their system. And that's a theme among defensemen offensively. But in any event, so Columbus gets Mason Lohrei. They also get Matthew Poitras. Just one last thing on Lohrei. We all know that he was being traded to Calgary for Rasmus Andersson, part of that package at least. Had Rasmus Andersson wanted to sign an extension in Boston. Obviously, he didn't. Bruins weren't willing to sign him without an extension in place. He goes to Vegas. We'll see what happens there with Vegas. I probably think Vegas, who's going to be cap strung, is going to elect to pay Pavel Dorofeev rather than Rasmus Andersson. But in any event, so Lohrai's days in Boston have kind of felt numbered, and it just feels like a change of scenery. Matt Poitras is a guy that, listen, I don't think the Bruins have to trade him this offseason. I just feel like a change of scenery might be wanted. I feel like behind the scenes, Poitras has probably been floated out there and dangled by the Bruins. And I think Poitras, if you gave him truth serum, probably looks at the Bruins roster, sees Elias Lindholm, sees Pavel Zacha, sees Fraser Minton, sees James Higgins, sees Dean Letourneau in the pipeline. Like, I just don't think Matt Poitras sees a long-term fit for him in Boston, where he's not going to be battling uphill for top 9 center duties. I think he could play 4th line center in Boston next year, and I would like to do that if he's not traded. But I don't think Matt Poitras wants that long-term. So I could just see a bit of a change of scenery here for both players. And again, many people may look at this trade proposal and say, why would Columbus trade a former 5th overall pick for 2 second rounders and a third second rounder? But listen, ultimately, Mason Lohrei and Matt Patra, they're far more than second rounders at this point because a lot of second rounders don't make it to the NHL. And Mason Lohrei has been an NHL regular for two and a half years now. And Matthew Patra has shown that he can definitely play at the NHL level. So we're not talking about arbitrary second round draft picks from last year. Like, these guys clearly have shown that they were second rounders that are hits because they are at least going to be NHL players. Matthew Patra is going to be an NHL player, whether it's in Boston or somewhere else. We all know that. I think we all agree with that. So it's a little bit disingenuous to look at Lohrei and Patra as, oh, they're just second rounders, because no, like, they've turned into NHL players and emerging NHL players. So you add them to the second round draft pick that Columbus doesn't currently have in 27 or in 28, but they'll get one back in 27 here. And the Bruins get Kent Johnson. Now, listen, Kent Johnson might very well be part of Columbus's future. They might not want to trade him at all. But you see enough smoke around the change of scenery fire regarding all three of these plays, honestly. And it just feels like this is a deal that could, work out for both teams, because of these three players named, Kent Johnson, Mason Lohrei, Matthew Patra, there's zero denying that the player with the most upside is Kent Johnson. So make no mistake about it, Columbus would be trading away the best player in this trade, but his value is kind of less right now because he had a down year this past year with Columbus. The year before, he had a pretty good year. I think he had like 57 points in 60-something games. And this past year, his production was not even half that. He had a pretty down year, and his value is probably low as it's probably going to be. So the Bruins would be trying to capitalize on a buy low situation. And there's risk here too with Kent Johnson. Like, Kent Johnson has all the offensive skill in the world. But are his details there? Can he be an effective defensive player at the NHL level? There's questions with him too. But in any event, this is the one trade I would probably try to do if I were the Bruins, realistically, because the other trade you might see Lohrei involved in would be if the Bruins tried to get Simon Nemec from New Jersey. But like I was alluding to earlier, if the Bruins give New Jersey James Higgins and a first-round pick and, a couple other pieces, yeah, sure. Like, that could get you Simon Nemec, but I don't want to give up those pieces for Simon Nemec. I don't want to give up Fraser Minton in a Simon Nemec deal. I don't want to give up Dean Letourneau or Will Zellers. I just don't, because Simon Nemec has his question marks too. Everybody talks about how he's a 22-year-old former second overall pick, and he is. But there's questions about his game too, and I don't know if I want to give up all that for him. So then it's like, but I'd give up Lohrei and a first for him. But guess what? New Jersey probably wouldn't do that deal. So I don't think Lohrei and Patra and a 27 first rounder. Let's upgrade this package. Let's say it's Lohrei, Patra, and a 2027 first rounder. I don't think that gets you Simon Nemec. So with that being said, I do think Lohrei is on the way out. I think Patra, I'm kind of 50-50 on him. But basically, I'm trying to look at some assets that the Bruins have that I think aren't longed for Boston for one reason or the other, and how can I optimize them? Okay, well, let's package Lohrei and Patra on a 27 second and see if you can pry Kent Johnson away from Columbus. I don't know if the Blue Jackets would do this, but I can try, can't I? I don't think this is crazy. Listen, if you think that Columbus wouldn't do this deal, I can't be too far off. Maybe a prospect or maybe another pick or something, but this can't be too far off because Kent Johnson, he has a lot to prove too, and he has question marks too. So there's reasons why you see his name out there in trade rumors and change of scenery candidacy. So I don't think this is crazy. It might not be an exact proposal, but I think it's close enough. I also considered, instead of Patra, maybe doing a Danslaw Schmelis, but I think I could see Patra wanting out, and I could see Schmelis just being a more of a happy camper right now with the Bruins and willing to battle his way onto a roster in a fourth line role at some point. So, and I think both those players are going to be NHL guys, but in any event, so this is the last trade that I have on my offseason game plan for the Boston Bruins. So just to recap here, we have the Boston Bruins trading Henry Jokiharju and the rights to Andre Gasso to the Vancouver Canucks for a 2027 third-round pick. We have the Boston Bruins trading Mikey Eyssimont at a $1.5 million cap hit and Jonas Korpisalo and his $3 million cap hit to the Edmonton Oilers for a 2028 seventh-round draft pick. We have the Boston Bruins trading Casey Mittelstadt to the Seattle Kraken for a 2027 second-round draft pick. And then we have the Bruins using that Seattle Kraken 2027 second-round draft pick to package it with Mason Lohrei and Matthew Poitras for Kent Johnson of the Columbus Blue Jackets in your classic change of scenery type of trade between young players. But Columbus is giving away the player with the most upside in this trade. Therefore, the Bruins have to give up more to get. So you give them Mason Lohrei and Matthew Poitras and a 27 second-round pick because Columbus does not have a second-round pick in 2027 or 2028. All right, so now an update to the Bruins' salary cap situation. Prior to any of these trades, the Bruins had projected cap space of $15 million. They were able to move out between Henry Jokiharju, between Jonas Korpisalo, between Mikey Eyssimont, between Mason Lohrei and Casey Mittelstadt. The Bruins were able to move out $16.5 million in cap space. However, they did acquire Kent Johnson's cap space or cap hit of $1.8 million. So the Boston Bruins currently in this exercise have $29.7 million of cap space to deal with heading into free agency. Now let's get to free agency. In free agency, I have the Boston Bruins making 3 signings. Forward Mason Marchment to a 3-year deal and a cap hit of $5.7 million. Right shot defenseman Darren Radish. I know I'm surprised I'm even saying this, but I'll explain in a second. For those of you that have been watching this show for the last few months, you know my feelings on this, but I have my reasons. And again, this is more so a realistic offseason I think the Boston Bruins are going to try to do. And I can't help but shake. I just know the Bruins are going to go out there and try to sign Radish or Anderson. So why fight it in this exercise? I think one of those two guys is inevitable. But again, I'll explain a little bit further in a second. So I have them signing Darren Radish to a 6-year deal with a cap hit of $8 million. And then I have the Bruins doing a bit of a depth signing and bringing in right shot defenseman Troy Stecher to a 2-year deal at $1.2 million cap hit as like an extra depth forward on the right side because they did trade away Jokiharju, but they bring in Darren Radish, and they're still thin organizationally on the right side in terms of right shot defensemen, because in this situation, now you have McAvoy and Radish, but then again, there's nobody really behind them in terms of right shots. So I bring in Troy Stecher just as a, again, veteran depth right shot defenseman that can come in and, in a pinch if you need him. 32 years old, I think. So it's small money, small term, whatever, like just a depth right shot defense signing. So with all of that said, I have the Bruins signing Darren Radish because honestly, I just don't see the Bruins having the assets to trade for Simon Nemec. Like Simon Nemec, Olin Zellweger. Zellweger, by the way, he's a left shot defenseman, which the Bruins could use, but they need more help on the right. And Nemec, to me, I like his youth and upside more than Radish for sure. But there's question marks about him. And what I like about Radish that I don't like about Nemec is to get Nemec, I don't think Lohrei and Poitras in a first rounder does it, as I said earlier. So I think you'd have to give up like a Fraser Minton and a first rounder plus, or a Higgins or a Letourneau or a Zellers in a first rounder plus. And I'm not giving that up for Simon Nemec. I'm sorry. I'm not going to rob Peter to pay Paul. I know the Bruins need help on the right side of their defense, but they can get it here. And all it's cost them is money. Now, listen, do I love the idea of signing Darren Radish till he's 36? No, but 36 isn't exactly 40, and his $8 million cap hit, when the salary cap is $113 million and $123 million and beyond, it's not that big of a deal. Is he going to be a 70-point guy for them? No, because in Tampa Bay, you had the Victor Hedman absence, and he was playing an accelerated role as the top power play quarterback. And I just don't know with Charlie McAvoy if he's going to get those minutes the same way he did in Tampa Bay. Maybe he does. But even if Darren Radish comes in and gives you 45 to 55, 60 points for 2 or 3 years or 4 years and helps stabilize your right side while you try to draft, some futures there and some replacements, then, it's not the worst thing in the world. Listen, beggars can't be choosers, and I don't know what other options the Bruins have at right defense, because again, unless there's a trade out there for a player that we don't know is available, and that's fair too. Like, again, Don Sweeney knows things that we don't, but outside of Simone Nemeth, I don't know who else is out there. They're not getting Brant Clark. The LA Kings, they're not going to let him go. He's like one of their only bright spots of their future. He's an RFA defenseman. Alex Nikishin in Carolina, he's not going anywhere. Olin Zellweger, is Anaheim really interested in trading him? Is he really going anywhere? And by the way, he's a left shot. So I just think that Darren Radish, I don't love the term. And there's still question marks. Is he a one-hit wonder? I don't think he is. I think he's going to be somewhere, between 45 points and what he did last year. Call him a 50-point guy, which is fine. But I'd rather sign him than trade away, Minton or Higgins in a first plus for Simone Nemeth. Like, to me, that's not worth it. If I could trade Patra and Lohrei in a first for Nemeth, I would do that. But I don't think Jersey's doing that. And they want nothing to do with Casey Middlestad. They don't want Alex Steves. They don't want Mikey Asimont. They don't want, they don't want Murat Husnudinov. So, if you wanted to give New Jersey Morgan Geekie and a first-round pick or something like that and a Simone Nemeth straight, like, go for it. I'm not doing that. So I just feel like Darren Radish, with the cap going up the way that it is, and the fact that I tried to address youth elsewhere in this offseason, which I'll get to with my lines in a second here, I just think that you have to give a little bit to the Bruins' top players right now, and I think Darren Radish is like the main. Here you guys go. Here's a legit top 4 right shot defenseman right now that can help us over the next 4 to 5 years, legitimately. So reluctantly, I have Darren Radish here, but unless you just want to concede and not really upgrade the position at all, which I just don't think the Bruins are going to do that, then if it's not Simone Nemeth, it's either Rasmus Anderson or Darren Radish. Again, unless there's a hockey trade out there that I just don't know exists. But as of this exercise being done, I have to go with what I currently know. So with all of that said, let's take a look at our lineup for next year. All right, so up front, and there's obviously room for interpretation, but I have Kent Johnson on the left with Pavel Zacha and David Pastrnak. Now, why is that? Because Johnson, to me, I think if you could put him in an elevated role where in Columbus he was kind of playing third line minutes, put him with some higher end talent and let his talent flourish. And I just think as a playmaker, he can really help create a lot of scoring chances for David Pastrnak. I know David Pastrnak, I know he can dish the puck just as well as score, but I just feel like in the last few years, David's gotten away from being a shot first guy. And listen, it hasn't really hurt his production overall, because in terms of point production, he's still killing it. But David's himself said after the season, he likes to get back to being a shot first guy and then, utilize that to his advantage to have passing lanes open up. So Morgan Geekie being away from David Pastrnak, I just feel like David needs to be around guys that can set him up versus the other way around. Obviously, he can do both, but primarily David has to be the shooting threat. He has one of the best shots in the NHL. So to get Kent Johnson in an elevated role where his skill and Pavel Zacha's, two-way stability and familiarity with David Pastrnak can obviously complement David well. And I look at this as a line that it might not work out, but why not give it a shot early and often? And then I have Mason Marshman on the left side with Morgan Geekie and James Higgins. And here, The thought process is that you give James Higgins a shooter, a finisher in Morgan Geekie so that his playmaking can thrive. At the same time, you have a power forward in Mason Marshman who can go to the dirty areas, win those loose pucks, get in on the forecheck, but still bring an element of skill to his game and create some room and some protection on the ice with James Higgins. And that's a line that, maybe they could do something. But again, I'm just throwing shit at a wall here based on the offseason. And again, the offseason moves I did is just me thinking about what could a Bruins offseason realistically look like. So you bring in Kent Johnson, who's a, former 5th overall pick with all the skill in the world. And we all know the Bruins have to get faster and more skilled. Kent Johnson brings that. You bring in Mason Marshman to kind of off balance what at times is a bit of a lighter forward group. Like Pavel Zacha is not a physical guy. Pasternak, not really. Higgins, he battles, but he's not going to, be physically imposing out there. Jeannot and Kaslik for sure, but they're further down the lineup. So I think in your top 6, it's important to have a guy that can kind of be a really good forechecker and finish some opportunities, and again just create some space out there. And for a big guy, Marshman, he can skate too. So that's a combination that you give Higgins a finisher and Geekie. You give Geekie a setup man in Higgins, and you give them both, a modern day power forward that can kind of do a little bit of everything for them. And maybe you have something there. Third line, I have Fraser Minten centering Marat Husnudinov and Elias Lindholm. I just think Lindholm, he can take some draws for sure, but I think that it's time for him to go to the wing if he's even healthy and not on LTIR, which that's another shoe to drop. If he were on LTIR, I guess my offseason will look a little bit different potentially, but I know Husnudinov and Minten work well together. Maybe this is a line that doesn't entirely optimize Minten's possible potential offensive upside, but you're giving him, a veteran on the right side in Lindholm that can be responsible. You're giving him a water bug on the left with some skill in Husnudinov. And, Minten himself he's kind of a blend of all of that. So this could be a good third line checking line that could provide offense, obviously. And then on the fourth line, again, I've infused some youth here. And I have Danslaw Schmelis, who he would have to, earn his spot here. But Danslaw Schmelis centering Tanner Jeannot and Mark Kastelik. And the result of this is that Sean Kuraly is going to be your veteran extra forward. Him and Alex Steeves. Maybe Alex Steeves goes on waivers and goes down to Providence. I don't really know. And with all due respect to Alex Steeves, I really don't care. Like, he's a decent depth guy, but it is what it is. So I like Sean Kuraly's leadership in the room, and I don't see them trading him necessarily. So, but I don't want him to block a young player. So I think Danslaw Schmelis can be that modern day fourth line pivot, at least to start his career at the NHL level. Similar to what you saw with Matt Patra, with Tanner Jeannot and Mark Kastelik in a small sample, and similar to what you saw with Fraser Minten between Kastelik and Jeannot. Give Kastelik and Jeannot some speed in between them, and a guy who can make some plays. And in return, they'll create space for him out there and be responsible. And those are good line mates to kind of come into the NHL and learn by. And if Matt Patra's not traded, this is the role I would see Patra in. But in this hypothetical situation, I have Matt Patra being traded with Lori to bring in Kent Johnson. So this is what my top 4 lines would look like. There's clearly still a lack of a true number 1 center. But again, I just don't think the Bruins can go out there and acquire that this offseason without giving up too much of their future. And I'm not willing to do that for basically some of the players I've seen out there. So I think, maybe the Bruins could address the top line center thing throughout the course of the season if somebody becomes available in trade, or maybe the following off season or whatnot. Maybe this gives you time to see if Minten can be that guy, or maybe it's Fraser Minten. Like, I have him in a third line role to start here, but clearly Minten could also start the year in the top 2 center roles like he was much of last year. I guess I'm just kind of wanting to see Higgins get a quick look here, but You can flip those two lines around for all I care. You can have Minton, Husnudinov, and Elias Lindholm be your second line in the depth chart, and Higgins, Marchment, and Morgan Geekie are your third line. I don't really care. But I feel like this forward lineup, it's not going to, be the highest scoring lineup in the league, but there's potential there. I think it's better on paper than last year's. You're pretty much subbing out Casey Middlestat for Kent Johnson and Victor Arvidsson for Mason Marchment, and then Sean Corrali for Dan Zloshmelis. It's kind of around the edges, and then a full year of James Higgins. It's around the edges. It's nothing very sexy, but it's a lineup that I kind of think gives you a little bit of everything outside of multiple star power. You do have star power in Pasternak, but you have some high-end goal scorers between Pasternak and Geekie. You have some high-end playmakers between Kent Johnson and James Higgins, certainly in theory, as they get their feet wet in the league. You have youth and skill and speed and maturity with Minton and Husnudinov, and they have upside. You get Dan Zloshmelis a look. You have a pretty solid fourth line. You have Elias Lindholm on a third line wing role. So again, I just think that this forward lineup is a step forward. It's not the end all be all. It's not a cup forward group, but it's also, I think, a bit of an improvement from the year before. And you're still allowing your youth to get some chances to show what they can do. And that to me is like the most important thing. You get to see Kent Johnson and James Higgins and Fraser Minton and Marat Husnudinov and Dan Zloshmelis. You get to see them show what they can do. And again, I'm skeptical you can get Kent Johnson for the price that I gave up, but I don't know. Kent Johnson's not Wayne Gretzky to this point in his career, so I think Lorai Poitras in a second is fair, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Okay, let's go to the back end now. So on defense, you have Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy. I have Nikita Zadorov with Darren Radish. And then, again, continuing with the youth movement, I have Frederic Brunet on the left and Jonathan Aspero on the right. Obviously, both of those guys are left shot defensemen. So one of them would have to play their offside, and Aspero has played the right at times for the Bruins last year. And Frederic Brunet has played the right side in Providence at times as well. So playing your offside as a defenseman, it's not the end of the world. It can definitely be done, and some guys even prefer it. So this would be my top six. I've moved on from Yoki Haru. I've moved on from Lorai, and you bring in Darren Radish to help solidify your top four. You get Nikita Zadorov, who I think thrives in top four roles. When Zadorov is on a third pair role, I feel like he kind of isn't mentally as, and it might be subconscious, but as motivated as he is when he's in the top four. When he knows he's in an accelerated role, I think he tries to rise to the occasion even more so. Sometimes a third pair role can kind of lull him to sleep, especially with Henry Jokiharju. So, Troy Stetcher, he's not pictured here, but, he's a depth right shot defenseman. So if Aspero or Brunet isn't cutting it, then you can bring him up. You can, I'm sure they'll re-sign Jordan Harris too as an RFA, so you could always have him pencil in. But I just feel like this is a much better decor than what they had last year. And I think it's time Frederic Brunet gets his opportunity and Jonathan Aspero kind of goes into a more appropriate role. And this gives Hampus Lindholm a chance to kind of show what he can do. Like he had a relatively off year last year. He hasn't seen the same since his knee injury. Here's your chance. Start the year with Charlie McAvoy, or I should say game 7, because McAvoy is suspended for the first 6 games of the year for Paul Bunyaning Zach Benson. But in any event, so this is what I have on the blue line. And then Jeremy Swayman and Michael DiPietro is your backup goalie. Okay, so I know that there might be some knee-jerk reactions to some of my moves. Really, Brian? You're signing Darren Radish? How's that getting young? Okay, I concede that, but it's even the Mason Marchment deal, it's 3 years and he's 30 years old, and I do think that he could be a good player for the Bruins. But everywhere else, like I'm going young. I feel like this is a relatively decent blend between leaning into the youth while adding just a couple of contracts that can show your top players, okay, they helped us out here. We have Darren Radish now who can help us get a lot of shots through from the point, and that's a huge weakness of our team. We brought in a former fifth overall pick, and Kent Johnson, who's got so much skill and upside and could potentially be a top line guy in this league or top 6 playmaker in this league. He's already had a 50-plus point year at 23 years old. He's coming off of a down year, but in an accelerated role, he could be the perfect reclamation project. All the skill in the world. We bring in Mason Marshman, and he can give us some top 6 skill and sandpaper. Not that the Bruins need more sandpaper, but he is a modern day power forward. So it's like you have the youth of Johnson, Hagans, Minton, Hustadinov, Brunet, right? Loshmelis, but then you have your 30-something core or thereabouts of your Zakas and your Pasternaks and your Geekies and your Marshments and your Lindholms and your Janots and your Kasteliks and your McAvoys and your Hampus Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, Darren Radish. So I feel like this is a pretty decent blend, and there's work to be done, but that's obvious. The Bruins aren't going to be a finished product. They're not winning a cup next year. So I just feel like this is a good see what you have type of year while still improving around the edges. And listen, they still have the number one center issue to potentially figure out if it's not internal already, but at least they solved the right side of their defense for right now. And they've added some players with skill and some speed, like a Kent Johnson and a Loshmelis and a Brunet. So that's my realistic Boston Bruins mock off season. Let me know what you think. I know it's not the sexiest mock out there. And maybe there's some things on my board that is off, but something along those lines, something in that ballpark is what I would try to do if I were the Boston Bruins. Thank you all very much for listening, and I'll talk to you on Friday.